Hello and welcome to today's BPF Futures podcast. I'm Andrew Teacher, founder at Blackstock Consulting, and I'm here with Bill Hughes, who's Head of Real Assets for Legal and General Investment Management, and Guy Grainger, who's EMEA Chief Executive at JLL. So Bill Hughes, the property industry has been on a huge course of change over the last few years. What are some of the big things looking ahead that you see coming up the road, and how are people going to have to change to deal with some of those challenges?
Well, I think we come from a background which has been way too passive. Owners of real estate around the UK have been complacent. They've sat on assets. They've collected income, and I don't think, in many cases, they've made a sufficiently imaginative contribution to society. But that's definitely changing now. I think the way owners of real estate engage with retailers has become more challenging, but we have to be more creative. The sort of residential real estate we're building is much more attuned to what people really want to have happen. And I think really the property industry recognises that it can make a positive contribution to society, really make a positive difference.
And social value, how do you quantify that? Obviously, as a business that has all sorts of shareholders and stakeholders, investors and partners and JVs, how do you, on paper, quantify something like social value? Yeah,
I mean, there is a regime now that gives you a clue in terms of the 30 or so factors you should be looking at, and you can generally aggregate those into a number of things like creating indigenous employment growth, like making people's lives better, which could be to do with quality of the air, accessibility, the general environment, and health and well-being is certainly part of that. And the more you can measure what we're doing by way of contribution, I think, the more recognition we'll get as an industry for what we're actually doing.
And Guy Grainger, in terms of JLL, clearly the advisory space has massively evolved over the last 10 years or so, over this cycle. What have been some of the principal hurdles that you've had to jump over the last few years in evolving the business?
Well, I think we've been very used to being in a competitive environment where there's lots of people trying to compete for the same type of work. But in the last few years, we've seen some new competitors come along, new technology businesses with major funding from venture capital. And they've changed the rules, quite frankly. They're playing a different game to us. And that's been very healthy for us to really introspectively look at ourselves and understand, are we truly delivering a seamless solution for our customers, or are we just repeating what we've always done? And I think it's really healthy, and that's led to a lot more innovation.
And in terms of the people that are going to be driving that innovation, I mean, as I think Bill mentioned, in terms of the industry not being perhaps as proactive as it could be, many would say that the property industry hasn't quite been as diverse as it could be over previous generations, and that's obviously going to have to change if we're going to meet challenges around, treating our customers in different ways and building new things and using technology. As a large people-driven business, what's the role that you have in that?
Yeah, well, there's lots of mantras from senior management around. You've got to change the people, or you change the people. Things like that. Honestly, there is a reskilling that's needed here in a lot of areas, not all areas. But I think that's true of the modern world, actually. It's not just our industry. We're living in changing times, and unless you're constantly curious and educating yourself and learning new ways to do things, then you'll get left behind.
And that's precisely what we're celebrating with the BPF Futures first anniversary. It's that contribution that the younger generation can make through getting more involved with the sector, through getting involved with the policy and the government relations work that the BPF does. And why do you think that's important?
Well, I think it's about all generations first, but I think what the younger generation can bring to the table is an energy without the legacy. And it's often hard when you've been successful by using old-fashioned techniques is to understand why you need to change. And I think that the next generation can help mentor and educate a lot of people as to the need for change, but also how you embrace new ways of working and new technologies to provide a much better solution.
And Bill Hughes, in terms of new solutions, new technologies, again, this is obviously something that L&G is at the forefront of with its work in off-site manufacturing, looking at constructing homes in factories and really changing the dynamic of the construction supply chain. And that clearly is going to need a number of new skills inside the people that you're bringing into the business.
Yeah, look, there's lots and lots of potential to modernise the sector we're in. Modern methods of construction is a really good example where the UK has been very much behind the curve in terms of the art of the achievable. Most other countries, to some extent, have addressed this. Japan probably leading. Other parts of mainland Europe have done pretty well. And it's astounding. It's astounding that the construction sector has very much stayed in the 19th century almost, if not the early 20th century, rather than seek to modernise. It hasn't had the impetus to get efficient. It hasn't really spent time thinking about what does the ultimate user, what does society actually want it to do. And I think it's exciting for us to be in the foothills of that as a project. And I think the UK has got a whole lot of challenges and change ahead of it in and around modular. But technology is changing everything we do. Access to data, change, innovation, being more fluid, being more adaptable, willing to challenge convention is all part of this. And I agree with Guy. One of the things that we really need to learn to do in our industry is to harness the talent from the new generation and really value their energy and contribution rather than necessarily listen just to people with experience, because society is moving fast and successful businesses will be able to harness the young, new ideas, creative, disruptive people coming into the industry.
But I think one of the reasons, Bill, that the construction industry hasn't changed is it hasn't needed to. There's very little sharing of innovation and opening the books up to new styles of innovation because, quite frankly, the market's been behind most people for the last 5 to 10 years. And so it's been an attractive environment where developers or investors haven't needed to innovate. And sometimes it also takes a lot of experimentation, a lot of investment, a lot of capital. And for that, you need real scale. And Bill and I are lucky enough to work for major organizations with very strong balance sheets. But you need that to innovate these days. Being a small company, you just can't necessarily compete.
So in terms of, I suppose somebody starting their career right now, Guy Grainger, that might be looking to make a name for themselves, looking to innovate. What sort of things should they be doing? What would be the 3 pieces of advice that you would give someone starting out now that wants to be a future star of the property sector?
Well, you've definitely got to try things out. You've got to that curiosity of
move fast and break stuff.
Not necessarily, I would say, but you have got to put yourself into uncomfortable situations. Clear the desk of the day job and take on new challenges. When I was younger, someone gave me some great advice and said, make yourself redundant every 5 years. Find a successor, because that successor will then challenge you in your role and you'll have to move on and do something else. And I think that's really sound advice. I think you should constantly be looking, not necessarily to map out your career for the next 20 years, but do it in short stages and really plan growth. Educate yourself. Constantly learn. That is the best way to progress in any industry.
And what's one of the most uncomfortable situations you've been in during your career? And how did you get out of it?
Well, I've been fortunate to have been offered some roles which have been completely different from previous ones I've taken on. Even when I was younger, to take on new opportunities where you literally turn up at the first day of your job and there is a clear desk. You have to learn again. You're at ground zero and you have to work your way up. And actually, that's a really cathartic process that you go through as an individual. And you learn a lot about yourself. And I would say it's healthy to do that every now and then. I think too many people in this industry have got stuck in a silo and stayed there for 20 years. Don't do it.
And Bill Hughes, what kind of advice have you been given that shaped you? What if you can look back on any game-changing tips or directions you were given? Any real big inspirational characters that you've had? Who was the Alex Ferguson of your career?
Oh, I've been lucky enough to work for quite a few people who I think are really influential. Probably the one that
Any proper hairdryer treatment? Sir Alex style?
I think you need to be resilient enough to handle that from time to time. I was lucky enough to work for one of the people who invented real estate research, property research, it was called in the UK, a guy called Peter Evans. Lucky enough then to work for one of the smartest prophetic strategists that has been around, a guy called Jerry Blundell, who was actually part of the Jones Lang LaSalle world. And what they probably taught me early in my career is this thirst for knowledge is a prerequisite. Challenge convention, and do not expect things to stay static. In fact, get yourself in a position where you can create change. And I think that's tough when you're young in your career, because that does require a certain amount of self-confidence. But there are people all over the industry who are protecting the status quo, who do need to be challenged. And I think the fastest way to become influential, and probably the best way to be excited by what you do, is just to challenge convention and really get yourself out there. Not just based on a whim. Get the facts.
How do you do that? How do you do that though, Bill Hughes, without being? Where's the line between confidence and arrogance, especially in a large corporate business such as L&G, such as JLR? How do you do what you're suggesting in a polite way?
Well, there's two things I'd say about that. First of all, to your question, you have got to be empathetic. You need to understand what the recipient of what you're saying is going to be thinking and how they might react to it. So there's no point being aggressive and endlessly making people feel threatened, but there is a way you can articulate a different course and get people to buy into it. Actually, the best way to get an idea adopted is to make someone else think it was theirs. The other thing I'd say, though...
So on that, what's the best idea you've ever given away?
I'll come back to that in a second. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is that, in my day, if you wanted to learn stuff, you would go to a library and you'd get books and you would read those books.
Do you want to explain what a library is for some of the BPF Futures people maybe listening to this podcast?
They still exist, by the way.
But there are some modern language libraries that are a little bit underused. But a place where books are stored, and you would have to go and find the book, and it wouldn't be easy to find the book you want to read, through an index, and then go and flip through it and find the bit that would help you answer the question you want to answer. But now, of course, through internet searches, of which there are many, you can get immediate access to information. There's no such thing now as a question that can't be answered relatively quickly. So there's no excuse actually to be anything other than pretty current, and you can challenge convention, and that's one of the reasons why things are moving on more quickly than they were.
And you should avoid arrogance. I think in today's world, humility is a great asset, and even accepting your own vulnerabilities is a sign of strength. But I think the best way to avoid just shouting your way to the top, because let's face it, in this industry and other industries, there are many salespeople out there, is to back it up with evidence, like Bill said. Come armed with evidence. If you've done your research, preparation, then as long as you've got evidence, then you can back it up. And the second thing is build a network. Build a network of people who can help you and who you can help. And by doing both, you should be able to progress in today's world.
And that's obviously a central part of what BPF Futures is aiming to do. It's to help people have that network on tap so that they can come in and really meet other people in a multidisciplinary environment, which is obviously, again, the nature of JLL and other advisory firms now, is that you're absolutely across every single discipline there is. And what are some of the projects that, what's exciting you at the minute, Guy, in terms of some of the big picture stuff that you're looking across the region?
Well, I suppose only for the last 3 years have I been in a truly international role, and it's been fascinating for me to spend time in other countries and get immersed, not just in the cultures and different ways of working, but to see how best-in-class examples of built environment are being displayed, and we've kind of missed them in the UK. Bill and I were just chatting before we came on air, saying actually some of the things being done in the Netherlands and Sweden around the circular economy and the built environment, are incredibly exciting, and they're attracting lots and lots of interest. The return on investment is even greater, but they're exciting because they're visionary. They're really long-term thinking and visionary. They've thought of something that no one else can provide. And do you know what? It's captured the imagination of occupiers, tenants, and businesses from around the world. And that's to be admired. And I think we're quite distracted at the moment in the UK, whereas we should be thinking bigger and more visionary.
And Bill Hughes, let's come back to my question about the greatest idea you gave away. What if you had to pick one thing that one bright...
Nice simple one to finish on.
Yeah.
I'm glad he didn't ask me that one.
Oh, you've got one coming in a second, don't worry.
I guess early on in my career, I sort of made the link between research and decision making. I suppose there were a lot of people around who did numbers but didn't do communication. A lot of people around who were good at having a beer and communicating and not necessarily linking the two. But that's how I got a grounding in the career, is linking analytical rigor with communication and persuasion. That's not a specific moment, a specific thing, but I think if I would think about the clever things or the influential things I've done along the way, it would generally be in that sort of space.
So communications and empathy, they're the two things we keep coming back to.
You know, our job now as senior people in businesses here is to influence the influencers, and that is in many cases the younger generation as well as the senior grey hairs.
And to finish up, Guy Grainger, what's one of the pieces of advice you wish you'd been given earlier on? If you could talk back to a younger self, what would be something you'd offer back?
Are you suggesting I'm not young?
Oh no, we're talking about 3 years ago when you were 21. What would you? That's obviously.
I think it would be just to have more courage. I think that's the main thing. Is you're going to fail at a few things. Don't be too afraid of failure, because that's where you learn the most, is through trying things and failing. So have a bit more courage of your conviction and go out and do it. And you know what? If you fail and have a setback, take it on, learn from it, and next time you'll come out stronger.
And Bill Hughes, to finish off, what's one of the most important traits you look for when you're bringing people into the business? I mean, what's one of the things that people can do to really stand out, to really demonstrate value, and to shine in a big business?
I think I have a bias towards people who have got equally visible attributes in emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence, or sort of standard IQ, because people tend to be one or the other rather than both, and it's only when you've got an emotional intelligence can you really influence people, and it's only when you've got the intellect to configure an argument and an influencing, compelling rationale for something can you have the armory to do that. So I tend to look for that, which is partly the brain power, but also comes back to communication skills.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's really useful advice. Thank you very much to Guy Grainger from JLL and to Bill Hughes from Legal & General. And we both wish a happy first anniversary to BPF Futures. I'm Andrew Teacher from Blackstock. Thanks very much.